Hello, hello, hello. I hope that my voice is legible or audible. Audible. That's it. That's it. That's the ticket. That's what I meant. That's what I meant. So sorry I'm late. Oh, look, I even have a. Oh, I didn't even realize I have a. I have a fire all picked out for us. Hello, kitten. Well, how is everyone? I hope you're good. I'm good. Yeah, I'm really good. That's right. I don't think it knows how many subscribers I have. Well, I made the new intro video to, oh, that's what I meant to do. Just hold on. So, what I am going to do, hold on. I think I can do this. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how you do that. Oh, wait, this might be it. I'm going to be turning on subscribers only. So that, so shouldn't say open to everyone. It's subscribers only. So, I think I'm still a little. I don't get that. Okay, I'm just gonna do that. Yeah, anyway, so, just to see, but I think most of the folks who want to participate in chat are subscribers already, so hopefully that's not too much of a hardship. I certainly hope not. But 'tis the season. 'Tis the reason for the season. Check your voter registration, darling. Last thing knock you off. Uh-oh, maybe a troll was turned off by that. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please hit the like and share the broadcast. I'm going to. I always want to call it Awakening Democracy. But now it's one of those things where once you say it that way, it's stuck in your head. Does it ever happen to you? Oh, I don't have enough space. I was singing, what was I singing today? Oh, oops, sorry. I was singing, oh, what was it? God, it was like a Linda Ronstadt song. What the hell was it? It was one of her later, like when she redid some swing or something. 40s, what the fuck? Oh, I don't even know why I can't remember that right now. Okay, wait. Um, it was something like, what was it? It was like someone to watch me. Somebody I'm longing to see. I hope that he follows my lead. Watch. He may not be the man some girls think of as handsome. To my heart you carry the key. Little lamb who's lost in the wood, I know I could always be good. You are over me. It has to be much smaller. I don't think that's gonna work. Oh, I know what I have to do. That's okay. That's all. Oops. Chicken paprikash. Send up. Oopsie. Send up. That's gonna work. Come on. Get out of here, duck. You're just like your father. Okay. Hello. I would like it to be this. Let's have. Oh, I don't think that's gonna work. There we go. Let's try that. That's kind of cool. Okay, well, that's not really that good. I just want to make it like, ah. Okay, fine. I don't know what I'm doing. Well, it's not too bad. You can kind of read it. Kind of. Anyway. So, what I'm going to be reading is Democracy Awakening. And I watched an interview with the author because I actually don't know much about the book, so I'm not quite sure what to expect. I know she's a history professor, and she gets a lot of respect for breaking down history into its greatest, or some, easy to understand language. So I and seem to want to hear the book. I would like us maybe next book. This one is actually quite short. It's only like 280 pages or something. I think we should choose a fiction book for the next one. And I'm kind of partial to The Master and the Margarita. It's a really good book. It's one of my favorites. It's a really good book. Here's a good suggestion. And then the other was a great suggestion too, and I'm actually I bought that. I'm looking forward to reading it. Of course I can't. It's Mita. I can't remember the name of the book. Oh my lord. Whatever. Useless. It's the one that's on the poll on my Twitter. So. This little lamb. I'm a little lamb. Oops. I have to hear myself. Can't hear myself in the monitor. There's a little lamb who's lost in the world. I know I could always be good to you. It's nice. I think my voice has to be in a little better shape. It's not the best. So. Hi, Badger. How are you? Sorry, I'm just taking my sweet time. I'm taking my sweet time. My sweet time. Gosh, this is like, I do have to address the delay. I will attempt. Let's see, I think I can also add the copy. I want to put the cover of the book on. Just a moment. I always forget that part. Let's see, where is it? There we go. All right, we'll do this. We're gonna put that right down. Doesn't need to be huge. You can sit here right by the fire. Okay, yep, that's the book we're reading. Okay, now let's see. Let me make sure that I've got everything I need. I think I do. Don't bleed. Perfect, perfectly charged. A little beverage in case my throat gets parched. And let me read a little bit about this book before we begin. New book time. It has not started. Nope, I'm going to start it. I'm going to read a little bit about the book, and then I'm going to start it. It's not a very long book. It's a pretty short book, actually. Let's see. I always forget its title. Let me read you lay blurb. Here we go. Okay. Oops. Here we go. All right. So first of all, Heather Cox Richardson is a professor of history at Boston College. Go Dogs. And she has written about the Civil War, Reconstruction, the Gilded Age, and the American West in award-winning books whose subjects stretch from European settlement of North American continent to where is it? Where'd she go? Oh, she lives in Maine. To the history of the Republican Party through the Trump administration. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, among other outlets. She is the co-host of the Vox podcast, Now and Then. That is who she is. And let's get the blur from the blue. Here we go. Let's see. Okay, this is all praise. I don't want praise. I want just a fucking synopsis. Okay, well, here. A vital and urgent call to action about the precarious state of American democracy, charting its historical challenges and current threats from one of our era's most important and insightful historians. She's also the author of a newsletter called Letters from an American. I actually had not heard of that newsletter before, but yeah, I know, or heard of, or nominated. Yeah, it's true. Well, to be honest, you're one of the few people who gave some suggestions, so I had to put something in the poll. And both of those books that you suggested, in case you missed it, I purchased because I want to read. Well, first of all, I want to read a novel. I want to read a fiction next, and then this one is actually pretty short. It's like 286 pages or something like that. So I think, oh shit, I think that it'll go pretty fast, and I think I'll be more committed to it. I'll be better. So, well, I mean, I like to keep them guessing. Someone just put a laughing emoji in the comments, so I don't really know what's going on. So yeah, but I want to read both of the ones that you suggested actually. Uh I don't remember the name of the Mitta book though. But and then Master and Margarita is one of my favorite books. So I think we definitely should read that. I haven't not read that. I probably haven't read that since college. So anyway, I thought it'd be fun to read that. But this is where I'm going to begin with this one. We're going to continue our history lessons before we go to sleep. All right, let me pull up this little booty pop. I guess I should have done more of a oh my god. Okay, wait, let me show you. Actually, I'm pulling it up right now because I'm gonna pull I'm gonna put my Kindle reader. Smells like such a granny. Okay. It is, drumroll please. Yeah, Master and Margarita is one of my favorites from college, but The Bell in the Lake, I bought that one. I also have a book about Deutsche Bank, but I think I'm going to read that one. Make people listen to it. But yeah, no, it's Democracy Awakening. Or Bell in the Lake is the one I bought. Dun, 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 dun. Perfect. Sorry, the pages are formatting. Yeah, it sounded good, so I bought the. So yeah, I'm interested in it. Sounds interesting. Alrighty. Oops. Hey, come on now. What are we doing? I want to read the forward, please. Oh, wow, I thought I had a forward. Very confused. Okay. All right, here we go. Well, now we're going to start with chapter 1 of Democracy Awakening by Heather Cox Richardson. All you have to do is sit back and relax. You don't have to go anywhere, I hope. You don't have to be anywhere, I hope. You just sink into your chair or lay on your bed or on your couch or stand on your back porch and look up at what are likely stars, I guess. I would imagine most people listening have stars. Maybe GP would. Just take a deep breath because this day is over and you don't have to deal with this day anymore. Chapter 1: American Conservatism. Today's crisis began in the 1930s, when Republicans who detested the business regulation in President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal began to flirt with the idea of making a formal alliance with two wings of the Democratic Party to stand against it. They turned to Southern Democrats, who hated that New Deal programs were not overly segregationist, and Westerners who disliked the idea of federal government protecting land and water. Those contemplating the alliance used the word conservative to signify their opposition to the New Deal. They insisted that a government that answered to the needs of ordinary Americans was a dangerous, radical experiment. This was not an accurate description of conservatism. It was a political position. In the 1920s, Republicans had taken control of both Congress and the White House. In the 1920s, Republicans had taken control of both Congress and the White House from Progressive era Democrats. They turned the government over to businessmen, believing that they would reinvest their money as only they knew best, providing jobs for workers and exciting products for a new middle class. At first, the nation's new glossy magazines advertised refrigerators and radios, stockings and speedboats. Those policies seemed miraculous. But then the great crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed it revealed how poorly distributed the nation's paper prosperity had been. FDR, then the Democratic governor of New York, warned that the Republican system worked only for those at the top. Quote, "Democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself," he later explained. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of a government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power. He told the American people they deserved a New Deal. Desperate to break out of the Depression, Americans embraced FDR's promise to use the federal government to protect ordinary Americans. In 1932, they elected him president and put Democrats in charge of Congress. In place of businessmen, Democrats brought into the government new voices like law professors and economic advisors, a so-called brain trust. Crucially, FDR also turned to Frances Perkins, who brought to the table the idea that the federal government should protect workers and women and children. A well-educated social worker, Perkins was a descendant of a colonial family and had spent significant time in a small town in Maine. In 1911, she had witnessed New York City's horrific Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, in which 146 workers, mostly young women, leapt to their death from a burning building after their bosses had locked doors to keep them from sneaking brakes on the fire escapes. The catastrophe inspired Perkins to bring the idea of old-fashioned community responsibility to the government, addressing the working conditions in rapidly growing cities with their immigrant populations and their unregulated industries. Recognizing the growing power of women in the Democratic coalition and eager to understand the needs of marginalized Americans, FDR named Perkins to his cabinet as Secretary of Labor. The first woman in a presidential cabinet, she served from 1933 to 1945, making her the longest-serving labor secretary in U.S. history. To get rid of the financial free-for-all that had sparked the Great Crash and the Great Depression, Congress regulated the stock market and limited the ability of bankers to use depositors' money to speculate in stocks. It also set maximum weekly hours and minimum wages for workers. 44 hours and 25 cents an hour, and prohibited child labor. It guaranteed workers the right to join unions. It provided jobs for the unemployed, and it raised tax rates on the wealthy. Congress also provided jobs programs for workers thrown into the streets by the Depression and created a basic social safety net, the centerpiece of which was Perkins' Social Security Act for women and children and workers out of a job from unemployment or retirement. Finally, the government invested heavily in infrastructure, bringing to ordinary Americans new opportunities previously available only to the wealthy. From the first, FDR's New Deal included, imperfectly, but included Black Americans and women. Racist Southern Democrats hated the new system. So did a rump group of Republicans, despite the fact that their own utter failure to manage the economy had left people living in packing boxes and eating out of garbage cans. In 1937, after Roosevelt's triumphant re-election, members of these two groups set out to organize against the New Deal. They agreed that the growing power of the federal government threatened what they called traditional values: individual hard work, private property, a balanced federal budget, and local control of politics. In early December 1937, a coalition of anti-New Deal lawmakers of both parties wrote a formal declaration of their principles and quietly circulated it to likely sympathizers. On December 15, 1937, their conservative manifesto leaked to the press. Called An Address to the People of the United States, it rejected the idea of public spending and called private investment the bedrock of the economic health of the nation. To free up capital, the manifesto demanded tax cuts and cuts to social welfare spending. It called for an end to government support for labor, which, it claimed, quote, injures all. It called for states' rights, home rule, and local self-government, by which it meant that the federal laws must not disrupt southern states' racial codes. It called for an end to public support for able-bodied individuals with a view to encourage individual self-reliance, trusting kinship and benevolence to provide a social safety net. We propose, the manifesto read, to preserve and rely upon the American system of private enterprise and initiative. The declaration received little congressional support. Republicans were referred to attack FDR without tying themselves to Democrats, and Democrats criticized those around FDR rather than be seen publicly undermining their president. But the manifesto caught the attention of whites-only citizens organizations and chambers of commerce, which endorsed it, and business and manufacturing organizations republished and circulated almost 2 million copies. Anti-New Deal newspapers continued to reprint it. The conservative manifesto was a blueprint for those who stood against FDR's New Deal. And it's this declaration of values that makes today's radicals claim to be, quote, conservatives. Take a moment, take a drink, make sure this is in good shape. And fabulous. Perfect. But this is not the historical meaning of conservatism in America. The idea of a conservative stance in politics emerged during the French Revolution, when Anglo-Irish statesman Edmund Burke recoiled from what was happening on the other side of the English Channel. As revolutionaries in France, I have to sneeze. Okay, that's easy. Sorry. Okay. As revolutionaries in France abolished the traditional hierarchies of government and the church, Burke took a stand against radical change driven by people trying to make the government enforce a specific ideology. Ideologically driven government was radical and dangerous, he thought, because the ideology quickly became more important than the reality of the way society and people actually worked. In 1790, Burke argued that the role of government was not to impose a worldview, but rather to promote stability, and that lawmakers could achieve that stability most effectively by supporting traditional structures, social hierarchies, the church, property, the family. Conservative meant, literally, conserving what was already there, without reference to an ideology. Those in charge of government should make changes slowly, according to the facts on the ground, in order to keep the country stable. This also meant that the government could be a positive force in society, rather than a negative one. That conservative political identity did not translate particularly well to America, where, because leaders were still creating a new government out of whole cloth, there was nothing long-standing to conserve. Until the 1840s, the word rarely appeared in the political realm. When it did, it referred to someone who rejected the radical ideas of abolitionists, who wanted to end human enslavement, or of women's rights activists, who wanted to give women the vote. The word conservative began to take on a specific political meaning in the U.S. when anti-slavery Northerners refused to honor the Fugitive Slave Act that was part of the Compromise of 1850. That law required federal officials, including those in free states, to return to the South anyone a white enslaver claimed was his property. Black Americans could not testify in their own defense, and anyone helping a, quote, runaway could be imprisoned for 6 months and fined $1,000, which was about 3 years' income. Enslavers and their Democratic colleagues began to call those speaking out against the Fugitive Slave Act radicals because they rejected a law. Charges of radicalism spread more widely 4 years later when Northerners of all parties organized against the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act, under which Congress allowed the spread of slavery into lands that had for more than 30 years been set aside for free labor. In December 1855, Democratic President Franklin Pierce used his annual message to Congress to accuse Americans who opposed the spread of slavery of trying to overturn American traditions. He described the United States as a white man's republic and claimed that the founders had believed in a hierarchy of races in which free white men ruled over the subject, quote, free white men ruled over, quote, the subject races, Indian and African. The editor of the Chicago Tribune, lawyer and staunch abolitionist Joseph Medill, Joseph Medill was outraged. He accused Pierce and his Democratic supporters, not the anti-slavery men, of attacking American laws. There are perversions of historical facts and false statements in General Pierce's message, which cannot fail to arrest the attention and shock the feelings of most conservative among us, he wrote. Medill had claimed the word conservative for the cause of equality. The editor called out as false all through Pierce's declaration that the founders had established a federal republic of the free white men of the colonies. In fact, he wrote, the founders had enshrined the nation's principles in the Declaration of Independence. Where in that document was the discussion of, quote, free white men, the editor asked. In it, he continued, quote, is there an intimation about the subject races, whether Indian or African? Their one guiding thought, as they themselves proclaimed it, was the inalienable right of all men to freedom as a principle, close quote. As the Republican Party took shape over the next few years, its members worked to undercut charges that they were wild-eyed radicals, quote, black Republicans and N-word worshippers. They embraced the idea that opposing slavery was a conservative stance. When Democratic Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas tried to portray his political opponent Abraham Lincoln as a, quote, radical abolitionist in 1858, Lincoln hammered home the idea that it was Douglas and his supporters, not the Republicans, who were the radicals. Lincoln claimed to be fighting against slavery, quote, on original principles fighting, in the Jeffersonian, Washingtonian, and Madisonian fashion. Lincoln did not use the word conservative in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, but on February 27, 1860, at New York City's Cooper Union, he claimed the mantle of conservatism for the Republicans, much as Pierce had done in his controversial 1855 message. Lincoln retold the story of America. In his version, though, that history was one in which the founders opposed slavery, and the new Republican Party stood on their side. Quote, you say you are conservative, eminently conservative, while we are revolutionary, destructive, or something of the sort, he said, addressing Democrats. What is conservatism? Is it not adherence to the old and tried, against the new and untried? We stick to, contend for, the identical old policy on the point in controversy which was adopted by our fathers who framed the government under which we live. Well, you, with one accord, spit upon that old policy, and insist upon substituting something new. Not one of all your various plans can show a precedent or an advocate in the century within which our government originated. When voters elected Lincoln president later that year, the centering of the Declaration of Independence led the Republican Party to create a new, active government that guaranteed poorer men would have access to the resources that the wealthy had previously monopolized. They put men onto homesteads, created public universities, chartered a transcontinental railroad, invented the income tax, and, of course, ended black enslavement in America, except as punishment for crime. As Lincoln wrote, quote, the legitimate object of government is to do for a community of people whatever they need to have done, but cannot do at all, or cannot so well do for themselves in their separate and individual capacities. By 1865, the party of Lincoln had put into practice their conservative position that the nation must, at long last, embrace the principles embodied in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and must have equal access to the resources to enable them to work hard and rise. That was the same position underpinning the New Deal, and those taking a stand against its business regulation and racial advances in the 1930s were not true American conservatives. They were the same dangerous radicals Lincoln and the Republicans of his era warned against. That was a short chapter. We're going to read another chapter. But first I'm going to take... Oh, sorry. I think it's interesting. I hadn't heard some of these things before. It's kind of amazing how our education system is so challenged. All right, here we go. Chapter 2. The Liberal Consensus. The New Deal did not immediately end the Depression or level the nation's racial playing field, but it won the loyalty of Americans who blamed the rich for having manipulated the economy until the great crash revealed its hollow core. Still, some Americans were wary enough of what Republicans called socialism to make FDR's program precarious. In 1937, worried about deficits and attacks from the right, FDR began to cut federal spending, ultimately by about 17%. Unemployment shot back up, and the stock market, which had begun to recover, fell again. It was not at all clear that the New Deal system would survive. Then, on the sunny Sunday morning of December 7, 1941, in a surprise attack, 353 Japanese aircraft bombed the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Honolulu, Hawaii, killing or wounding more than 3,500 Americans and destroying U.S. aircraft and ships. 2 hours later, Japan declared war on the United States. The next day, the U.S. declared war on Japan, and on December 11, 1941, 4 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, both Italy and Germany declared war on America. Quote, the powers of the Pact of Steel, Fascist Italy and National Socialist Germany, ever more closely united, stand beside heroic Japan against the United States of America, Italian leader Benito Mussolini said. We will be victorious. The Steel Pact was the vanguard of a new political ideology. Mussolini had been a socialist as a young man and had grown frustrated with how hard it was to organize people. No matter what socialists tried, they seemed to be unable to convince their neighbors that they must rise up and take over the country's means of production. The efficiency of World War I inspired Mussolini to give up on socialism and develop a new political theory. He rejected the equality that defined democracy and came to believe that some men were better than others. Those few must lead, taking the nation forward by directing the actions of the rest. They must organize the people as they had done during wartime, ruthlessly suppressing all opposition and directing the economy so that business and politicians worked together. Logically, that select group of leaders would elevate a single man who would become an all-powerful dictator. To turn their followers into an efficient machine, they demonized opponents into an other that their followers could hate. I keep thinking back, I'm taking a side note, I keep thinking back to when I was in that dinosaur suit and I was protesting outside Dinesh D'Souza's movie, and the man asked me if I knew what fascism was. To turn their followers into an efficient machine, they demonized opponents into an other their followers could hate. This hierarchical system of government was called fascism. Italy adopted it, and Mussolini's ideas inspired others, notably Germany's Adolf Hitler. When Hitler became chancellor in 1933, he claimed that Germany was the successor to the Holy Roman Empire that had dominated Central Europe for 1,000 years. These leaders believed that their new system would reclaim the past with the ideology of the future, building pure men into a military and social machine that moved all as one, while pure women supported society as mothers. They set out to eliminate those who didn't fit their model and to destroy the messy, inefficient democracy that stood in their way. Before Pearl Harbor, there were Americans who believed that the new democratic coalition was driving the economy and the political system into chaos. They had embraced fascism as a way to reassert traditional power structures. But after the Pearl Harbor attack, the movement collapsed as Americans embraced the war effort, sustained by FDR's clarion defense of democracy and the media's focus on stories of popular heroism. One of the first of those stories featured black messman Doris Miller of Waco, Texas, who was stationed on the USS West Virginia at the time of the attack. Assigned not to fight but to serve the white officers on the ship, Miller abandoned the laundry he was collecting when the first of the 9 torpedoes hit. He helped rescue the ship's mortally wounded captain and then took over an abandoned anti-aircraft machine gun. Miller immediately became a national sensation. Congressional support eventually led Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the commander of the Pacific Fleet, to personally award him the Navy Cross, then the third highest Navy award, for gallantry during combat. Throughout the war, reporters, generals, and lawmakers praised the ordinary Americans like Miller, the G.I. Joes, as the backbone of the American war effort. While Axis powers emphasized the heroism of their leaders and Hitler championed a hierarchical society in which a superior race ruled subject races, FDR and the media reminded Americans again and again that democracy, based on the principle that all men are created equal, is the best possible government. But for all that leaders were talking about democracy, it was ordinary Americans who were defending it. Thanks to armies made up of men and women from all races and ethnicities, a mixed population Nazi leaders disdained, the Allies won the war for democracy against fascism. Of the more than 16 million Americans who served in the war, more than 1.2 million were black men and women, 500,000 were Latinos, and more than 550,000 Jews were part of the military. Native Americans served at a higher percentage than any other ethnic group who fought. More than a third of able-bodied men between 19 and 50 joined the service, and among those 25,000 soldiers were the men who developed the famous Code Talk, based in tribal languages that Axis codebreakers never cracked. At home, men and women from all backgrounds threw themselves into war work in the factories and fields, cementing their loyalty to the nation, while the economy, bolstered by extraordinary deficit spending to fight the war, boomed. If America had not been totally sold on the New Deal government in the 1930s, its victory in World War II seemed to confirm that FDR's approach to governance was right. By 1945, most Republicans joined with the Democrats to embrace a government that regulated business, provided a basic social safety net, and promoted investment in infrastructure. The national celebration of equality during the war had the effect of highlighting that all Americans were not actually treated equally. Black Americans fought in segregated units. Race riots broke out between white gangs and their black and brown neighbors in cities across the country. Women generally had to play secondary roles in the military, and the government incarcerated Japanese Americans. In 1944, an especially horrifying sexual assault brought national attention to racial inequality. 6 white men gang raped a 25-year-old black woman in Abbeville, Alabama, and 2 grand juries refused to indict the men, despite their confessions. Black leaders in Abbeville took Recy Taylor's case to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, founded by journalists, reformers, and scholars on February 12, 1909, the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birthday, to promote equality of rights and eradicate caste or race prejudice among citizens of the United States. The NAACP worked to secure voting rights, education, jobs, and complete equality before the law. The NAACP had long focused on the challenging racial inequality by calling popular attention to racial atrocities and demanding that officials enforce laws already in the books. The attack on Mrs. Taylor as she walked home from church was particularly newsworthy. The secretary of the NAACP's Montgomery, Alabama chapter, Rosa Parks, investigated the assault on Mrs. Taylor and then pulled women's organizations, labor unions, and black rights groups together in a new Committee for Equal Justice for Mrs. Reese Taylor to champion Mrs. Taylor's rights. As a child, Parks had watched her grandfather guard the family's house with a gun as the Ku Klux Klan marched down their Montgomery Street, and since 1943, she had traveled across Alabama, making records of rapes, assaults, murders, and voter intimidation motivated by race. Her new organization expanded across the United States, calling attention to what unequal laws wrought. Neither FDR nor his successor, Harry S. Truman, could move civil rights legislation through Congress because of the segregationist Southern Democrats in their own party. But after he took office in 1953, Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower took up the cause. He appointed former California Governor Earl Warren, a Republican, as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Warren set out to use the power of the federal courts to enforce American equality, and under his watch, the landmark 1954 Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka decision began the process by declaring racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional. I just want to stop for any chuds that might be listening. The Brown v. Board of Education decision that ended racial, or that was, that declared an end to racial segregation in public schools was only passed or only acknowledged in 1954. That's not that long ago. There are people who, more than likely, many, who were subjected to segregation in their schools. So, this is not an old issue as some chuds claim. This is happening now. It's just that you don't see it, or you don't want it. But we have to. We need to fix it. So we can be that more perfect union. That's my commentary. In 1956, Republican Arthur Larson explained that the modern democratic policies and traditional republicanism had come together in a system he called modern republicanism. Echoing Lincoln, Larson explained, quote, "Our underlying philosophy is this. If a job has to be done to meet the needs of people, and no one else can do it, then it is proper function of the federal government. Americans have, for the first time in our history, discovered and established the authentic American center in politics. This is not a center in the European sense of an uneasy and precarious midpoint between large and powerful left-wing and right-wing elements of varying degrees of radicalism. It is a center in the American sense of a common meeting ground of the great majority of our people on our own issues against a backdrop of our own history, our own current setting, and our own responsibilities for the future." We're going to go to another chapter. These are very short. My goodness. We're going to zip through this book. But first off, I hope everybody's still enjoying it. Chapter 3. Okay, here we go. All right, chapter 3. bringing the Declaration of Independence to life. In the first years after the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board decision recognizing racial segregation as unconstitutional, that faith in American equality was mostly aspirational. But Black Americans and people of color who had fought for the nation all over the world during World War II were not content with promises. They demanded actual equality. To generate the kind of public attention and political pressure that would finally enshrine minority rights into law, they mobilized organizations like the interracial NAACP with its publicity savvy and legal talents. In February 1946, a brutal attack on Isaac Woodard, a returning World War II soldier, jump-started the process of engaging white lawmakers in protecting civil rights. Still in his uniform, the decorated veteran was on a bus making its way from Georgia, where he had been honorably discharged, to his home in North Carolina. Soldiers on the bus, both black and white, were socializing and drinking, and Woodard asked the bus driver to pull over at a rest stop so he could relieve himself. The driver at first refused, calling Woodard boy. Woodard told him not to talk that way. I'm a man, just like you. When they reached the next stop in Batesburg, South Carolina, the driver found a police officer to get Woodard off the bus. Chief Linwood Shaw arrested Woodard and beat him, plunging a billy club into each of his eyes, and then threw the semi-conscious man in jail overnight. The next day, he hauled Woodard before a local judge, who found him guilty of disorderly conduct and fined him $50. Woodard was free to go, but he could not see to leave. He went back to the jail to lie down, telling Shaw he felt sick. A doctor, Schulfetch, recommended Woodard be moved immediately to the nearest Veterans Administration hospital, 30 miles away in Columbia. There, doctors confirmed that Shull's attack had left Woodard permanently blind. When the South Carolina government refused to charge Shull, the NAACP spread Woodard's story to those with a public voice. In July, actor Orson Welles read the wounded soldier's affidavit on his popular radio show, and for the next 4 shows he called out South Carolina officials for refusing to prosecute. On September 19, 1946, Walter Francis White, the executive secretary of the NAACP, met with President Harry S. Truman in the Oval Office to direct the president's attention to the case. Truman was born in Missouri in 1884 and reared as a Southern Democrat. His early letters were thoroughly racist, but the Woodard case had changed something in him. He later said, quote, "When a mayor and a city marshal can take a sergeant off a bus in South Carolina, beat him up and put out his eyes, and nothing is done about it by the state authorities, something is radically wrong with the system." Truman ordered the Department of Justice to open an investigation, and less than a week later, a federal U.S. District Court indicted Shull and his accomplice. But local rule triumphed in the trial. The audience applauded as an all-white jury acquitted Shull after just a half hour of deliberation, accepting his explanation that he hit the unarmed Woodard in the eyes in self-defense. Presiding Judge Julius Waddy Swearing, the son of a Confederate veteran, was disgusted by the jury's verdict and by the cheering crowd. He began to stew on how to challenge racial discrimination legally when white juries at the state level could simply decide to nullify the law. For his part, Truman didn't have to stew. On December 5, 1946, he put together the President's Committee on Civil Rights, directly asking its members to find ways to use the federal government to protect the civil rights of racial and religious minorities in the country. The committee's final report recommended new federal laws to address police brutality and lynching, protect voting, including for Indigenous Americans, and promote equal rights, accounting for the incarceration of Japanese Americans as well as discrimination against Black Americans. It called for, quote, "the elimination of segregation based on race, color, creed, or national origin from American life, and as the NAACP had done, also called for a public campaign to explain to Americans why ending segregation was important. Truman knew he couldn't raise enough congressional votes to pass the kinds of legislation the committee recommended. Instead, he found a workaround, starting the process of establishing that the military, civil service, and defense contractors could not discriminate on the basis of race. In 1948, after the Democratic National Convention approved a platform plank in favor of civil rights, prompting a walkout of Southern Dixiecrats led by South Carolina Governor Storm Thurmond, Truman shocked the political world by campaigning in the black neighborhood of Harlem in New York City. Pundits assumed that Truman's move towards civil rights would destroy his hopes of re-election, but voters confounded conventional wisdom by putting him back in office, giving us the famous picture of a victorious Truman holding the Chicago Daily Tribune over his head with the editor's wishful thinking in the headline, "Dewey defeats Truman." Before Truman's second inaugural, another civil rights case blew up, one that would help shift battle lines over race in Congress. In the segregated town of Three Rivers, Texas, the widow of a decorated soldier, Felix Longoria, who had been killed in Luzon, Philippines in 1945, wanted to hold a wake for her husband when his body came home in January 1949. The local funeral director refused, saying, quote, "The whites won't like it." About an hour away in Corpus Christi, Mexican-American doctor Hector Garcia took up Longoria's case. Garcia had organized the American GI Forum the previous year to emphasize that Hispanic veterans were Americans who were fully entitled to their constitutional rights. The New York Times picked up Longoria's story, and at Garcia's urging, brand new Texas Senator Lyndon B. Johnson intervened to arrange Longoria's burial in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The ceremony was symbolic, not only for what it said about the present, but also for what it said about history. The Arlington Cemetery had been established during the Civil War on the grounds of Confederate General Robert E. Lee's plantation. An official ceremony for Longoria there explicitly rejected the South's history of white supremacy. In Johnson, the civil rights movement now had a powerful congressional voice, but even with the support of Democrats like Truman and Johnson, the movement could not overcome the power of racist Southern Democrats. By virtue of the fact that they tended to be re-elected for decades, these senators held crucial committee chairs in Congress that were awarded on the basis of seniority. It fell to Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower, whom voters elected in 1952, to find a way around the racist rope. Eisenhower preferred not to upset the nation's racial status quo dramatically, but he respected the men who had fought and died for democracy. He also recognized that racial discrimination gave international communists a powerful argument for disparaging the idea that American democracy was a superior form of government. In January 1954, Eisenhower put the power of the Supreme Court behind civil rights by appointing Earl Warren as its Chief Justice. Immediately after his confirmation to the Supreme Court, Warren faced a case argued by NAACP lawyer Thurgood Marshall, along with civil rights lawyer Constance Baker Motley and other civil rights advocates. In 1934, as a young Baltimore lawyer, Marshall, who had learned to love the law because his father, who was a waiter, loved following court cases, had begun to work with the NAACP. In 1940, he founded the affiliated NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund in New York City. 6 years later, Motley joined him. She would become the first black woman to argue before the Supreme Court and the first black woman to become a federal judge. They were a powerhouse team. Marshall had previously won discrimination cases by relying on the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson decision that allowed, quote, separate accommodations for black and white Americans so long as they were, quote, equal. Marshall would point out how much poorer the conditions were in black schools as compared to white schools, proving these conditions violated the separate but equal requirement in the decision condoning racial segregation. But in 1952, with the support of Judge Waring, Marshall and Motley opposed segregation in public schools outright by arguing that racial segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This formula would enable the federal government to restrain white juries at the state level. The Supreme Court listened. In May 1954, it handed down two key decisions. Hernandez v. Texas declared that all white juries denied Mexican-American defendants equal protection of the law, and the Brown v. Board of Education decision declared the same thing about segregated schools. Relying on the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court declared racial discrimination unconstitutional. The decisions were unanimous. Now the fat was in the fire. The Supreme Court demanded that the federal government protect the equal rights of citizens within the states. It said that the Equal Protection Clause within the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment meant that the protections in the Bill of Rights applied to the states, continuing a process that the court had begun in the 1940s through the efforts of several FDR appointees. Discriminatory state laws were unconstitutional. White Southerners promptly set up all-white schools known as segregation academies, often funded with public money, and Black and brown Americans who stood up for their right to equality lost jobs, homes, and sometimes their lives. Mounting white reactionary violence exploded into view in August 1955 when Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam murdered 14-year-old Emmett Till, a Chicago boy who was visiting relatives in a small Mississippi town known even then for its brutality toward Black people. After Bryant's wife accused the boy of flirting with her, the two men kidnapped Till, brutally beat him, mutilated him, shot him in the back of the head, and dumped his body in the Tallahatchie River. NAACP leaders Ruby Hurley, Medgar Evers, and Amzie Moore demanded that Mississippi conduct an investigation. Till's mother, Mamie, insisted on an open casket funeral for her son, and pictures of the child's mutilated body exposed the vulnerability of American lives if states looked the other way when white men took the law into their own hands. When an all-white jury acquitted Bryan and Milam, outrage built. NAACP workers organized mass demonstrations across the country. Then the two men admitted their guilt and sold the story of the murder to Look magazine for cash, making the fragility of American democracy clear even to those who hadn't previously been paying attention. The pressure for racial equality built. In December 1955, Rosa Parks refused to move to the Black section of a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And for the next year, Black Montgomery citizens and their white allies organized carpools, taxis, bicycles, and even horse-drawn buggies to enable Black Americans to stay off segregated public transportation. Members of the White Citizens Council attacked supporters of the Montgomery bus boycott and firebombed the homes of two ministers leading the boycott, Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King Jr. When authorities arrested King and 88 other leaders for conspiring to cause a business, bus company, financial harm, the boycott became national news. In December 1956, the Supreme Court ruled that state laws segregating public transportation were unconstitutional. In 1957, when 9 Black students tried to enroll at a central high school in Little Rock, Arkansas, massive resistance prompted Eisenhower to federalize the National Guard and send the 101st Airborne Division to defend their constitutional right to do so. The president pushed Congress to protect Black voting, using its authority under the 15th Amendment. Lyndon B. Johnson, now the Senate Majority Leader, signed on to the Civil Rights Act of 1957, strengthening Black voting rights. Even though Johnson permitted Southern Democrats to water down the bill, Strom Thurmond, by now a senator from South Carolina, took advantage of the fact that the Senate had never developed a rule to make people quit talking. He launched the longest filibuster in American history in an attempt to stop the measure. Thurmond's drama didn't work. The federal tide was turning. The Civil Rights Act passed with a bipartisan vote of 285 to 126 in the House and 71 to 18 in the Senate. A majority of both parties had swung behind it. Going forward, the federal government would protect the rights of American citizens from states that refuse to recognize the American principle that all people are created equal and have a right to a say in their government. So that is the conclusion of chapter 3. I mean, I'm tempted to save it. But I do have some things to share. Just stay tight. Because I won't do this justice at all. And I just want you to know that. But I happen to really love Pablo Neruda as a poem, or a poet, rather. Just really dig him. He's dramatic like I am. And he's whiny like I am. I really identify with whiny and annoying Pablo Neruda. I'm kidding. He's not. I mean, maybe he is. I don't know. But I do like his poems. All right, so I'm gonna read this one. It's in English, and I'm sure the translation doesn't do it justice. But it's about sleeping. So I thought it'd be a great way to end this. So I apologize in advance to the descendants of Pablo Neruda and the experts and the super fans and the ghosts. So Sonnet 81. And now you're mine. Rest with your dream in my dream. Love and pain and work all sleep down. The night turns on its invisible wheels, and you are pure beside me as a sleeping amber. No one else, love, will sleep in my dreams. You will go. We will go together over the waters of time. No one else will travel through the shadows with me. Only you, evergreen, ever sun, ever moon. Your hands have already opened their delicate fists, and let their soft drifting sighs travel away. Your eyes closed like two gray wings, and I know after following the folding water you carry, it carries me away. The night warmed, the wind spin out their destiny. Without you, I am your dream. Only that. And that's it. Have a wonderful night, and it's time to rest. I'll see you in the morning quite early.